Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday. I just found out. Thursday, November 17th, 2016. I don't even know what day it is anymore. It sure feels like Friday, but they all feel like Fridays these days. Or alternatively, they all feel like Mondays. I'm not sure which exactly. World's collapsing around our feet. But we have a radio show, so here we go. We're ready to roll with another one. Bill in Portland, Maine kicks us off with a morning tweet as usual. Daily Coast Radio is live now. That's what this is all about. Who's paying leprechauns to listen to Kagro X? I don't know. And how much? Well, I assume a pot of gold. The only question is, where is it? How large is it? I guess. And I don't know. I'm not sure what else we can ask about it. Is it in Donald Trump's house? Does it look like Donald Trump's house? Has it all been melted down and is now coating the furnishings in Donald Trump's house? That could be it. This morning, we found out that Ben Sasse isn't one of the smart guys among the Senate Republicans who might stand up in a principled way to Donald Trump. How do we know? Well, this morning he tweets in response to what exactly, I do not know, but he tweets from his verified, honest-to-God, really me Twitter account, which I don't know whether he tweets or pays somebody else. Twitter for BlackBerry. There's a pretty good chance he actually tweets off of a BlackBerry. Why don't we have more reporting on paid rioting? He asks. Who pays for it? How much? Why? Through what organizations? Who are the quote-unquote workers? Who recruits? All good questions in a world where that was actually happening. Though I note that we have at least seen one wise Twitter respondent respond by sending Senator Sasse some explanation of his question, sending him news reporting about the Brooks Brothers riot in Florida in 2000. That would be helpful. Kevin Thurman is our Johnny on the spot with that one. Hey, follow along, too, why don't you, on Twitter, KM Thurman, spelled just as you might think Thurman was spelled, unless you are a Russian puppet. Puppet? No puppet, you puppet. So, okay, so you can check out Kevin's Twitter feed that way. It really is too bad, and it's rather amazing, and I think after, snarking a little bit about it, and I enjoyed the snark as much as anybody about firing back. Why not reporting on leprechauns? How come we're not hearing more about that? Was that Jesse Byrne sent that one around? Everyone ought to be following him as well. But true, the fact that this would reach this level, and I had to send that on to the senator, seriously, you could pick up any newspaper and read about the flow of misinformation and fake news and Facebook's role in all of it, if any. I mean, as a conduit, certainly. But, that's all over the news. I'm a little worried that the guy seems to have no clue whatsoever about what's actually being reported about a fairly serious problem. I understand he wants to be partisan and jump on the bandwagon and help out the new Trump administration because they're Republicans, and maybe if he gets in good with them, he can help dissuade them from the worst possible things. That's a very generous possible explanation for what he's doing. Unfortunately, there's also the very possible explanation that, he's going to fall in line like the rest of the dummies, and he's just not going to get it. It's weird. All right. Well, anyway, let's see. I also shared an interesting video from Oliver Willis, just random nonsense from around the country, just still more of the same, though, but illustrating a slightly different take on the post-election psychosis that has overcome Trump voters. They now feel entitled to use, or at least use claims of having voted for Trump for essentially, what would we say? Well, in addition to the racism, just generally boorish behavior, and possibly I don't have to pay for things anymore because I voted for Trump and you have to give me stuff for free in this country now. Just I think video taken by somebody with a cell phone camera of some guy raging in Starbucks because he's mad at the barista. Over what? We don't know. Is his claim legitimate? Was there actually even a dispute, or is he just berating people because they're in low-paid jobs or people of color? I have no idea. It doesn't really matter. But he spends the bulk of the video insulting this person as garbage. But what was mostly interesting about it was that he invokes, "I voted for Trump. Trump won. We won in this country. So now you have to." He was arguing over a refund. I don't know why he wanted a refund, but the video, I don't know. It was just interesting. I'll pass it along. I tweeted it out this morning or retweeted Oliver's use of it on his blog. I just found it interesting. Sort of indicative. It's interesting that they've created a little entitlement program for themselves now. They no longer have to, actually pay for things or be decent humans. I imagine, like I was saying, think about how much worse this is going to get when they start to hear, if they do hear this thing, wink, wink. Don't know how it happened, but if they begin to hear that you no longer have to file federal income taxes if you were a Trump voter, you have an income tax amnesty for the 4 years, for that matter. If you voted for Donald Trump, I have no doubt that will circulate shortly in online right-wing circles. It's already circulating in left-wing circles. I'm not certain that it's actually a great idea. I thought about it I wondered if it would work as a prank to tell Trump voters that, or to spread that rumor and then see if they were dumb enough to fall for it and say, "I read online that you don't have to file federal income taxes, so I'm not going to," and then they get in trouble with the IRS. But I could see it going this way. If a couple thousand people actually fall for it and don't file, and then tell IRS investigators, I didn't actually file because I heard that we didn't have to file if we were Trump voters. And if it doesn't, if there's not that many of them, I could see Bannon counseling Trump to issue some sort of a tax amnesty for those people, just to troll the liberals and say, that one backfired. Now those people really don't have to pay taxes. You just saved them thousands of dollars. How do you like that? To which I would say, you're a gigantic diaper baby, and how do you like that? Except, what could you do? He'd be running the executive, and I wouldn't, so I don't know how much better I'd feel about that. Well, plenty to talk about, and I did recover that video. I don't think I need to play it on the air. The audio of it wasn't that enlightening. Just sort of thought I'd share it with you. I'll stick it in the roundup email for Scott, which he'll base the afternoon posts on. And again, everybody thank God for Scott. If I was stuck at the desk all day writing the summary of the show that I just did, I don't know that the show would last that long. I'd certainly be thinking about cutting it back to an hour and maybe only once a week. For some reason, that's a really difficult task for me. So thanks again to Scott for taking that off my hands. Another appeal to everyone. Of course, this is going to be an important couple of years for supporting independent media, which I guess means me. I guess I'm certainly independent of being paid for this media, so you could change that by donating. I want to encourage everybody to visit our Patreon site, and maybe I need to spend some time beefing up the site and come up with some premiums to give people. I don't know. We could make a mug or something on one of those online sites. Hats. Make America Listen to David Waldman. I can't even put again on that. Besides which, it wouldn't fit on the hat. Anyway, I do encourage you to visit the Patreon site. And special appeal to those of you, thank you very much, who have supported the site via PayPal. That is a very easy way to donate once, and even to donate, make recurring donations. It is possible via PayPal, but as you've probably seen in the morning posts over the last couple of days, I think it's time, and I might have to maybe contact donors directly, individually, to ask them whether this is something they would be willing to do. A lot of people don't like to sign up for anything new if they can help it, and I can certainly understand that. And they figure, I'm already sunk with PayPal. But given the fact that Peter Thiel is still a big deal at PayPal and presumably still draws a few pennies from each of us every time we have a PayPal transaction, and then uses the money to do, well, as of late, horrible things with it. Maybe Facebook, or rather, well, hell, maybe Facebook too, but that's jumping the gun a little bit. But maybe PayPal belongs properly on that list of organizations that we ought not to be giving money up to willingly. Boycott, of course, is the proper term, but it does feel a little impotent. I mean, it's all you can do is to vote with your dollars, and I guess every dollar counts. And there are an awful lot of us, I guess, who might feel the same way. And I don't know, maybe just drops in the bucket. But would you like to drop PayPal and take away that drop from the bucket? That there is an alternative. Patreon exists. I don't know what their politics is. I hope they don't turn out to be crypto fascists, whatever that actually means. And I guess if they do, well, more pressure on the old recurrency guys to roll out their new platform so that we might be able to use it. Anyway, so if you are donating on a recurring basis, thank you very much. You make it possible for me to give at least a token payment to Scott for doing all of this work so that I can remain somewhat sane, get a few hours to do other things. Unfortunately, I end up spending that time collecting stories of children who find unsecured firearms and shoot themselves or their brothers and sisters or parents or neighbors. So that's not particularly uplifting use of the rest of my time. And I ought to do a fundraiser for that, too. I don't know, too much unpaid work in my life, I guess. Anyway, if you are, thank you very much, a supporter via PayPal, do consider moving over to Patreon, making a pledge in the same amount over on the Patreon site, and then I guess do remember, go back and cancel that PayPal payment. I don't know how easy they make it for you. I didn't really give that much thought. PayPal was just sort of the gold standard at the time. But hopefully it's not too much of a hassle. And then as we close it down, as people migrate over there, I will close down the recurring payment account, for which, by the way, I am billed $20 a month just to keep that ability open. So let's migrate over there. Let's make it no longer worth my while to pay them the $20 to recover these weekly or monthly payments. And then we can have Peter Thiel out of our hair, at least, or at least wash our hands of the guilt. But, I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever be able to separate ourselves with it. He's an investor in so many things that we likely will not be able to give up and won't want to give up. It's a complicated job, boycotting evil. Anyway, plenty of stories to get to today. We are, of course, without Greg Dworkin this morning and his usual stop by to recap the stories of the day. However, I have not yet scrolled down to see whether he took care of the, did he do the abbreviated pundit roundup today, or did that fall to somebody else? Yes, he did, as a matter of fact. So he's on his way to his meeting, but he has filed his APB, or APR rather, APB is something entirely different. And so we can check in on all of that. And, look, the Jonathan Corner tops things off. There's a lot of writing on the weirdness of this transition and the weirdness of having Trump in the White House, not quite yet, but and of course the weirdness of having to convince people that it's not normal and you should not normalize the hiring of a so-called white nationalist in the form of Steve Bannon as a chief advisor. I by the way, I want to register my protest against the use of the terminology white nationalist, not because I don't think it's warranted, but because I don't know what nation he's working for, and I have a difficult time calling him a white nationalist if I can't even pin the nation down. As Joan McCarter told us yesterday, much attention now being paid to the comments of the National Security Agency director, who came right out and gave us this semi-cryptic message about a nation state, an unnamed nation state, actively intervening somehow to try to change the outcome of our elections. And it's beginning to catch on. What we're supposed to do about it, we haven't yet been told. I don't know. I guess it's weird because I never really thought we would need to be told what to do about it if we found that out from the NSA. But it's also been a long time since anybody really just trusted whatever the NSA spat out. Just to begin with, it's hard to get over that. All right. Well, let's see. Let me dive into Pocket and get through the first layer of stories that I have dropped on top of the growing pile, and then comb down a little bit and see if I can't find what other fun things I need to share with you. The top line news today, here is, by the way, speaking of fake news, an entry in the Washington Post. And it just occurred to me, one good way after shutting down the PayPal accounts, one good way to empty out the balance there, although I will also need to find a better and more convenient and politically correct way of paying Scott, because PayPal's an easy way to transfer dollars over to him. But yeah, I can go back to writing old-fashioned paper checks and put them in the mail, I guess. Anyway, I guess when I have to empty out the account, some of it will go to Scott, and then some of it I guess I could use online to pay for a subscription to the Washington Post to support the reporting of people like David Fahrenthold. And I guess the reporting of Caitlin Dewey, who writes this piece for the Intersect section of the Washington Post, which is a thing that I can't remember what it actually is supposed to mean. But anyway, Facebook fake news writer being interviewed here. I think Donald Trump is in the White House because of me. I wonder how you deal with that, if you really believe that that's the case. What's up with this? What do the Amish lobby, this is the beginning of the article, this is very esoteric, weird. Look at this. What do the Amish lobby, didn't know they had one, gay wedding vans, didn't know there were such a thing, and the ban of the national anthem have in common? Now we understand why we've never heard of any of these things. For starters, they're all make-believe and invented by the same man. Paul Horner, the 38-year-old impresario. That's a word I've taken to using of late, describing when I use impresario with John Casablancas and Paolo, what was his name? I can't remember his last name. Zampoli. Those guys I've been calling modeling agency impresarios from guys that used to tomcat around with Donald Trump back in the day. Paul Horner, the 38-year-old impresario of a Facebook fake news empire, has made his living off viral news hoaxes for several years. Why am I struggling? Why am I dealing with donations to run this radio show when I could be making up fake news and getting paid for it by idiots? And I'd rather take money from idiots than from hardworking, honest people like you. But I don't know. I can't find enough idiots, I guess. He has twice convinced the internet that he's British graffiti artist Banksy. He's also published the very viral, very fake news of a Yelp versus South Park lawsuit last year. Each of these things are linked if you'd like to go and take a look at them. But in recent months, Horner has found the fake news ecosystem growing more crowded, more political, and vastly more influential. In March, Donald Trump's son, Eric, and his then campaign manager, that is Donald's then campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, even tweeted links to one of Horner's faux articles. His stories have also appeared as news on Google. This would be the top item in the news. If you Google basically the premise of the fake article, gee whiz, you'll turn this up. But who knows how else you might stumble on a story that's entitled "The Amish in America Commit Their Vote to Donald Trump, Guaranteeing Him a Presidential Victory." That's what it says. Ironically, or not ironically, but interestingly, it is listed as an ABC News piece. How that happened, I'm not entirely sure. Maybe you can find out for me. The screenshot here says the Google term was The Amish vote for Donald Trump. And then it turned up as a top hit, this piece, which appears to say that it's from ABC News. Is that his fake news organization that somehow masked itself as ABC News, but it stands for like ABC gum, already been chewed? I don't know. Not sure what that's supposed to be. All right. Let's see. Proceeding on then with the article. In light of concerns that stories like Horner's may have affected the presidential election, and in the wake of announcements that both Google and Facebook would take action against deceptive outlets, Intersect called Horner to discuss his perspective on fake news. This transcript has been edited for clarity, length, and bad language. I hope it's properly edited so that I can help. I won't have to do any of the editing myself. Okay, so question 1 here. This is an interesting interview, I think. You've been writing fake news for a while now. You're kind of like the OG Facebook news hoaxer. Maybe we shouldn't be like chuckling and normalizing this behavior either. But anyway, well, I'd call it hoaxing or fake news, the questioner says. And I assume the questioner here is our writer, once again. That is Caitlin Dewey. So she says, I'd call it hoaxing or fake news. You'd call it parody or satire. And that is an important distinction. And I don't know if he gets it right, but let's see. How is that scene different now than it was 3 or 5 years ago? Why did something like your story about Obama invalidating the election results, which got almost 250,000 Facebook shares as of this writing, go so viral? Have you even seen this one? I haven't seen this one. And by the way, I never did track down the fake story about that crazy lady who was screaming at the reporter said about him giving $1 million a month anonymously to feed the children. That never even turns up, even in fake news. Okay, so what's Horner's answer to this? And it's such a, well, I'll see whether the interview gets any more pointed, but the opening question is certainly very soft, as opposed to, how can you justify getting up in the morning? Why don't you kill yourself? The question is, hey, what's changed in the hoax scene lately? But okay, it might be just an opening sweetener. He answers, honestly, people are definitely dumber. He's pretty blunt. They just keep passing stuff around. Nobody fact checks anything anymore. I mean, that's how Trump got elected. He just said whatever he wanted and people believed everything. And when the things he said turned out not to be true, people didn't care because they'd already accepted it. It's real scary. I've never seen anything like it. I do think that that Facebook and social media definitely have a role in it, by the way, just from my own editorial comments, and a big role at that. And part of it is how easy they make it to share news. It's so easy and so tempting to hit that retweet or I guess the like button or to share. I'm just not a Facebook person. I don't really know what the kids are calling it these days, but certainly on Twitter, the retweet button. And it's so easy to do. And it's actually, I mean, it's not a difficult thing to do to stop and try and fact check it before you retweet it, but there's definitely a premium on the speed here. And they make it so easy to retweet, and you want to be one of the first people to share it with your friends, and it's a pain in the butt to go and check the news. I still do it every time I see something that really grabs me as, that doesn't seem like it could be real at all. I try and double check on these things, or I see that it's from a source that I don't trust a great deal. I actually do try to pay attention, but there's definitely been times when I've retweeted something, even if it's just as simple as a hoax, a parody Twitter account. And some of them have been really clever by, doing things like disguising themselves by using a capital I instead of a lowercase L to sign up for like real Donald Trump, and one of the L's is actually a capital I, and the computer has no idea that that's not a thing, and they let you do it, and all you have to do is copy his picture, and you're off to the races. I've definitely retweeted things like that, and even when I've done that, and then you find out there's questions about what good is it going to do you to go back and delete the tweet? And there's varying responses. People sometimes go back, delete the tweet. Sometimes they retweet. I started retweeting the old tweet with an annotation that says, I got fooled on this tweet and I'm sorry. But also, it's probably worth noting that there's also a lot of people who are just generally inclined to drop those things and say, well, all right, so I got fooled on it, so I just won't retweet it anymore. And I guess if I discuss it with anybody, I'll say, I recently found out that was wrong or it was a hoax, but they don't do anything to correct the record. That's just the nature of social media. Even if you did correct the record, there's no guarantee at all that there's no reason to believe that the people who saw the original will also see the correction. They may have just turned off Twitter and gone along on their merry way after retweeting what you retweeted. But I don't need to tell you that because you already know it. So why don't we talk about the rest of this guy's questions and answers. So he says it's real scary and he's never seen anything like it. Except, of course, he was making a living off of it for the past couple of years. So I think he has seen something like it. You mentioned Trump, and you've probably heard the argument or the concern that fake news somehow helped him get elected. What do you make of that? My sites, he says, were picked up by Trump supporters all the time. I think Trump is in the White House because of me. His followers don't fact-check anything. They'll post everything, believe anything. His campaign manager posted my story about a protester getting paid $3,500 as fact. I made that up. I posted a fake ad on Craigslist. Now a senator is questioning people about where people are getting paid, who's paying, how much, why, through what organizations. That's where we are. As a matter of fact, I should screenshot this and take the URL. Excuse me, everybody. I have to go and do this here now, and send it to Senator. Here we go. All right, there's my screenshot. Let me take this and go over here and let's see. All right, here you go. What's the guy's handle? It's Senator Sass, I think. Is that right? Yeah, there we go. Okay. Oop, you know what? I'm going to have to do this as an original because then I can't attach my screenshot. That's the thing I wish Twitter would fix. I need to be able to attach pictures and responses more easily. Well, okay, going to have to do this the old-fashioned way. Sorry for the interruption, everybody. This is live tweeting on the radio. Who would have guessed that tweeting on the radio would be such an exciting endeavor? But I really feel like, I want to catch this in the moment if he's still on his Twitter, which he's probably not, but catch it as close to real time as possible. So let's get this and then add the screenshot that we just took about the guy saying I made the whole thing about paid protesters up, and he can enjoy that for the morning. Okay. So everybody else can go and retweet that and make sure that he has gotten 250,000 copies of that in his inbox, and maybe we'll make a dent in this guy's head. I got no idea whether he's going to acknowledge this or not. Okay, so let's continue to read this very informative interview. You mentioned Trump. You've probably heard the argument, right, about all the fake news. He says, yeah, I make that stuff up all the time. Corey Lewandowski even retweeted it I made up this story about protesters getting paid $3,500. I recall hearing Trump himself mention that every time there was a protester, he would say, how much are you getting paid? Although he had lowered it to $1,500. In his mind, he had heard $1,500 instead somehow. But remember the guy, like election eve, who was tackled because somebody said they saw him protesting with the sign, and they shouted out, gun! We didn't even get a chance to discuss that one because it happened like the evening before the election, and we didn't have a live Tuesday show, and we never did get back to that one, right? That was the guy. He showed up at the event in, I don't know, who knows where it was. We could look up the story. It's probably in Pocket, and I never got to it. But he had just a sign that said Republicans against Trump. There are such things, right? So he shows up and he opens the sign, but he's approaching the stage. And I guess to get rid of him, they go, they're pulling his sign up, but then somebody yells out that he's got a gun. And my guess is that maybe somebody thought that would work to get his ass kicked and to get him thrown out. But it scared the crap out of everybody, and the Secret Service had to come and hustle Trump off the stage. You remember this, right? And afterwards, I mean, they released the guy, this suspect, so quickly. There's no chance in the world that he had a gun. They would never let him go if he actually had shown up and had a gun on him and got caught, called out as a possible assassin. But no, because he had no gun, and there was no evidence he had a gun, and there was no evidence that there was any basis from which to shout out that he did. They let him go almost immediately. But as he approached Trump with his Republicans Against Trump sign, Trump asked him up front, "Oh yeah, here's another one of these protesters. How much are they paying you, huh? $1,500? How much did you get paid?" It's amazing. I mean, we shouldn't be surprised, as we've noted in the past on the show, Supreme Court justices, who we like to think of as being slightly smarter than the average politician, though there's no basis for that. They've been fooled by the same dumb stuff before. Of course, look where it got him. He's dead now. But Scalia and his broccoli tax and his insistence on the Cornhusker kickback, although that one's a little bit more defensible in that it once existed and then just got stripped out of the actual bill itself once it was up for final passage. But at least it was once in there. But the broccoli tax thing, I heard there was really going to be one kind of stuff. I mean, that, and there's been a number of things. I can't even remember all the half dozen or so things that Scalia somehow managed to convince himself were real because he heard it on Rush Limbaugh, which really, I mean, these are guys ruling on the federal rules of evidence all the time. Honest to God, you got to be better than that. Anyway, it looks like everybody's enjoying the tweet to Senator Sass. I guess Chris Hayes picked up on that one, and good. Now he's going to get the 250 copies in his inbox that I was hoping for. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Internet. I need money. Can I just do it that way? Somebody needs to invent tweeting money. If you can just tweet money, or really, they've been working forever. How come they can't get this right, by the way? They've hacked everything else in the world. Micropayments. Everybody keeps talking about that. If we could do micropayments where you could, when you stop by to download the show, click on a thing that sends me a dime. Really, literally, like a dime. I'd be rolling in it. It'd be fantastic. I could hire assistants. I could have a studio with actual equipment that can't be knocked off the air because internet, probably. I don't know. Maybe not. Anyway, it would be great to be, set with an actual job that everybody in my household respected that way, for a dime a piece. Just the number of people who are downloading the show, it really would work. Anyway, never mind. Less about me, more about fake news. Unless the fake news is about me getting lots of money. It is as fake as it is very cheering to think about. Anyway, what about this next question? Why? That's the question. Why? I mean, why would you even write that? That is my biggest question about the hoax things. I mean, clearly money, but, obviously I have a great deal of difficulty figuring out how to do things that are less than ethical, but that pay really well. I if I could figure it out and make myself do it, I'd be set already. But it just seems like I can't get that done. But I'm actually more fascinated, minus the question of money. It really is something. Here's a skill I really don't seem to have. Maybe it's that and that frustrates me. I want to have all skills. But here's one I don't have: calculus and making up fake news that's very nearly plausible and that's designed to be so believable that it spreads virally, like this stuff. I am constantly amazed with the BS that these guys come up with, because it's almost brilliant sometimes. Sometimes it's so outlandish, like Alex Jones. I could make that up. That doesn't intrigue me. Aliens are coming. There you go. Or aliens are here. I'm an alien. Trump's an alien. That's not interesting. It's the ones that are like, the paid protester thing, or, I don't know, I guess the Amish one. But just picking out like the Denzel Washington one. Like to me, it's a sort of amazing skill to put together something like that. Denzel Washington. I would never think to do anything at all with Denzel Washington. If I'm making a movie, yes. But I mean, it would never occur to me. Gay wedding vans? It's not a bad idea. I sometimes find myself somehow, in a way, admiring their ability to come up with things that are just that close to maybe being true, but they're usually about issue areas that say, how does this even occur to you? So I don't know. I'm a little bit in awe of that. That's not to say that I wouldn't like to see them beaten to death, but I am in awe of it. Why, she asks him, why would you even write stuff like that? Just because his supporters were under the belief that people were getting paid to protest at their rallies, and that's just insane, he says. That doesn't really explain it to me. Why would you write that? I mean, I guess they already believed it, so maybe that's interesting. Maybe that's not the origin of it. They already believed it because somebody else said it, so he just piled on and wrote another fake story. That's one of the more insidious angles of the virality. You see that other people are already doing it, and you don't even have to be original to make big bucks at it. You just grab whatever's already circulating, write it down in article form, and claim the money. So, okay, why would you write something like that? Just because his supporters were under the belief that people were getting paid to protest at their rallies, and that's just insane. That might, by the way, again, I can't get through this article without commenting on everything, but I do find that that's interesting for a number of reasons. One, of course, the projection thing. I guess in right-wing world, there's so much wingnut welfare, although the average Republican-leaning voter doesn't get any of that, I don't think. But anyway, but there is a lot of wingnut welfare. I mean, James O'Keefe makes a living doing his crap, and I don't understand. Why can't I? I don't know. Mine is easily as crappy as his stuff, but I don't. But that is the point. There is, even if I really was contributing something of enormous value, which I have my doubts about, I couldn't get paid for that on the left because the left doesn't pay its activists. They just don't. I mean, it's a well-known thing, not because they're pure, but because the left-leaning organizations just hate parting with their dollars, and they like, they'll hire executive directors and such. But the idea of just paying activists is anathema for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that doesn't feel right to begin with. But, maybe an activist who is a little bit more organized in producing material like O'Keefe, you'd think that would be supported on the left, and it isn't. And I don't know whether that's generally speaking, a good thing or a bad thing, because it could certainly lead to, I don't want O'Keefe's of the left, but, you do want people who are, doing real things, and you're going to run into that problem of ending up paying people who are effective but liars all the time. I mean, we pay plenty of effective liar executive directors along the way too, but anyway, I find that that's a basic misunderstanding that the right has about the left. Maybe because it's so easy to find yourself getting paid for crap on the right. Maybe I'm wrong about that and I've been misled about that, but at any rate, I guess it's easy to believe that the other side could sell out. But if you know anything about liberal organizations and the liberal activist base, you just burst into laughter every time. And the idea of anybody paying anything decent to do anything that's actually helpful to the left. Anyway, he says he just wrote it because they already believed it, and he knew that they would circulate more of this stuff. I've gone to Trump protests, he says. Trust me. No one needs to get paid to protest Trump. I just wanted to make fun of that insane belief, but it took off. They actually believed it. That's the trouble with satire. I have another trouble with satire story somewhere in pocket I'm trying to make a note to myself here. See, if I had more money, I could have a producer who would know exactly the story that I was talking about and would bring it up for me. I've made a note. Okay, we'll go on. He says, he continues on here, I thought they'd fact check it, and it'd make them look worse. I mean, that's how it always works. Someone posts something I write, then they find out it's false, then they look like idiots. But Trump supporters, they just keep running with it. They never fact check anything. Now he's in the White House. Looking back, instead of hurting the campaign, I think I helped it. And that feels, and it's in brackets, bad. That feels bad. So that feels crappy, perhaps? I don't know what exactly the word was that he used. I mean, for all I know, it could have been, that makes me feel like an F nozzle. I don't know. I'm just guessing at what the expletive was. Well, anyway, Donald Trump, please get rid of the FCC prohibition on naughty language on the air so that I can say whatever the hell I want without upsetting the good folks at We Act Radio, 1480 AM on your dial in the Washington, D.C. area. There's a little plug for you. Hope you're not in commercial. Next question. You think you personally helped elect Trump? I don't know. I don't know if I did or not. I don't know. Great interview, by the way, but at least he's being honest. If you're the editor at this point, do you say, this is fun, but I don't know. I'm not going to print this. All he says is, I don't know. I don't know what I did. Oh, all my news was fake. Did you elect Trump? I don't know. Anyway, it's good personal interest stuff. I guess I'm curious, says our questioner, if you believed you might be having an unfair impact on the election, especially if that impact went against your own political beliefs, why didn't you stop? Why keep writing? And he answers, I didn't think it was possible for him to get elected president. And we have a lot of that going around. I thought I was messing with the campaign. Maybe I wasn't messing them up as much as I wanted, but I never thought he'd actually get elected. I didn't even think about it. In hindsight, everyone should have seen this coming. Well, everyone assumed Hillary brackets Clinton, thank you, editors, would just get in. But she didn't, and Trump is president. We all knew who Hillary was. You didn't have to. Okay, thanks very much. Ay. All right. Oh, look, lots of people tweeting that Ben Sass tweet. Well, he's really going to get it. Good. Someone will write him up, and maybe we'll get that effect after all. Ben Sass is going to end up looking dumb. I don't know whether that's going to help us or hurt us. He may just end up resenting us and ending up pro-Trump. But anyway. I don't know. Continuing on here. Speaking of Clinton, did you target fake news at her supporters, or Gary Johnson's for that matter? Horner's Facebook picture shows him at a rally for Johnson, by the way. And he answers, no, I hate Trump. I'm not sure whether that means, no, I only focused on Trump because I hate him, and I've said that already, or I would never focus on anybody that might ruin their chances of beating Trump. I don't know. But no, I hate Trump. Is that it? You posted on Facebook a couple weeks ago that you had a lot of ideas for satirizing Clinton and other figures, but that no joke, in doing this for 6 years, the people who clicked ads the most, like it's the cure for cancer, is right-wing Republicans. That's a quote from him. That makes it sound like you found targeting conservatives is more profitable. Yeah, it is. They don't fact-check, he responds. But a Trump presidency is good for you from a business perspective, right? It's great for anybody who does anything with satire. No, it isn't. I mean, it's okay. It's good for me in that there's lots of material, but it's terrible for me in that we're all going to die, and I don't make any money on top of all this. And if I take $5 from each of you, then you don't have any money left. So it sucks. It's great, though, he says, for anybody who does anything with satire. There's nothing you can't write about now. There's nothing you can't write about now that people won't believe. I can write the craziest thing about Trump and people will believe it. I think that makes satire more difficult, but okay. I write a lot of crazy anti-Muslim stuff, like about Trump wanting to put badges on Muslims, or not allowing them in the airport, or making them stand in their own line. And people went along with it. They not only did they go along with it, they actually said this was a good idea, I'm sure. Facebook and Google, she asks, recently announced that they'd no longer let fake news sites use their advertising platform. I know you basically make your living from these services. How worried are you about this? That's right. I know it's a good idea and everything, but now they're closing the door on it, and I can't even... When am I going to get to cheat people out of money? I need to find a new way of... I don't know why I don't jump into this game. How much more damage can I do? Trump's already elected president. Right? Now is the time for me to get in on it. But Google and Facebook, they're going to keep all the money for themselves. Damn it. So is he worried about it? He says this whole Google AdSense thing is pretty scary. And all this Facebook stuff. I make most of my money from AdSense. Like, you wouldn't believe how much money I make from it. Right now I make like $10,000 a month from AdSense. I'm really saddened by that. By the way, I put YouTube ads in the podcasts, right? I threatened to do that. Say, we're going to make some money, damn it. And I'm tired of asking you people for the money. Why don't we ask corporate America for the money in the form of clicks from ads in the podcasts on YouTube? And I think I've made like $3 from this thing, and it's been up for like a month. It's just not the way to do it. You got to have a website full of. I guess that's where you get like all those really lurid tabula ads or something, and you stick those on the bottom of a website. What I have to do is park the podcasts on a website somewhere, and then populate the gutters of it and the borders of it with BS crappy ads and then hope people click on them. But my problem is my content, I think, attracts people that are too smart, or at least too busy, if you don't like to think of yourself that way for some reason, to click on dumbass ads. So I don't know. I mean, I put the ads in the YouTube videos there just in case, but, you know, people are just like, I'm not going to click on that ad. I never understood that. I've come here to hear this thing or to see this video. Even if I'm just goofing around and watching dumb things that mean nothing on YouTube, I never click on the ads. Even if I want what's in the ad, I don't click on the ads. I don't understand how that works. And I think it's just, there's just so many people in the world, and that if enough of them start watching this video, they'll either accidentally click on the ad or say, I like that car, I'll click on the ad. And just, but a tiny percentage of them. But if millions of people watch your videos and 1% click on the thing, you know, you end up making $10,000 a month. It upsets me. It really does. What I could do with $10,000 a month? Well, one thing, I could get my family to respect me. For another, I could stop talking about the money for once and focus on this story. All right, so he makes $10,000 a month from AdSense. God damn it. I know ways of getting hooked up under different names and sites, so probably if they crack down, I would try different things. I have at least 10 sites right now. If they crack down on a couple, I'll just use others. They could shut down advertising on all my sites, and I think I'd be okay. Plus, Facebook and AdSense make a lot of money from advertising on fake news sites. For them to just get rid of it, they'd lose a lot of money. That's probably one of the best points about it. If you're really thinking that this will fix the problem, remember that they make an awful lot of their money this way. They don't want that shut down either. So next question, and I think it's the last one. And he says, but if it really did go away, that would suck. I don't know what I would do. Get a job. Do a radio show. It's fantastic. Thinking about this less selfishly, though, the last question, it might be good if Facebook and Google took action, right? Because the effects you're describing are pretty scary. And his answer, yeah. I mean, a lot of the sites people are talking about, they're just total BS sites. There's no creativity or purpose behind them. I'm glad they're getting rid of them. I don't like getting lumped in with Huzlers, whatever that is, Huzlers. I like getting lumped in with The Onion. The stuff I do, I spend more time on it. There's purpose and meaning behind it. I don't just write fake news just to write it. So, yeah, I see a lot of the sites they're listing, and I'm like, good. There are so many horrible sites out there. I'm glad they're getting rid of those sites. Although, again, how do you differentiate between them? That's going to be a difficult thing for Facebook to handle. And also, I mean, The Onion is The Onion, but I am tired of seeing these things that are just BS news. Like, I don't think anything about it. I don't know. I haven't seen his site, but certainly the excerpted idea of, well, I wrote about people getting paid to protest. That doesn't really feel like good satire. The Onion really knows what it's doing. But that other site, there was the other like knockoff satire site, The Current. It's horrible. I mean, eventually you got the hang of what their satire voice really was, but mostly it was just stuff that was plausible, like children's April Fool's jokes, right? Like I told you, my kids would do. Hey, there's somebody at the door. There is? April Fools, there isn't. That's not a good hoax, because there could be somebody at the door. Why wouldn't there be somebody at the door? And you get it? I mean, that's what The Current struck me as. All right, so that's it, man. He just says it'd be good if they got rid of those sites. I just hope they don't get rid of mine, too. So he's a little bit of a gimme-tarian on that. A fascinating interview, just mostly to reveal the fact that there are people who do this for a living. It's a real thing, and they make real money, and they have real thoughts about it. And I don't know if I agree with allowing them to continue to live freely. But I don't know. So you've woken up the white working class resentment in me there, sir. So it's not without merit, the whole thing. Okay, let's see. Here's a story that I want to share just briefly. I'm really going to try and limit it to briefly. This is no surprise here, but I wanted to put this one out there in case we spot it. It might be a fun game to look out for this. It's from TheWrap.com, and it is titled Rebranding Steve Bannon Inside the PR Campaign to Rehab Trump Advisor's Image. How a KG publicist is trying to fight the bad press about the president-elect's new chief advisor. No surprise in the sense that, of course, they would be doing this. If you have resources, you would absolutely go out there and get somebody to do publicity for you and try and reverse all the bad press about this. No doubt about it. But what I thought might be interesting is if we read this part here. If you see any stories in the next few days, whose piece is this, by the way? I should credit. Tim Malloy is our writer here. He says, if you see any stories in the next few days about how Steve Bannon was a great boss at Breitbart News and excelled during his time in the U.S. Navy, you'll know that publicist Maria Sliwa is thriving in her job. I don't know if I would... It was a little awkward, that sentence, but okay, just remember the name there. Maria Sliwa. I don't know if she's related to Curtis Sliwa. Is Sliwa a common name out there? Remember the Guardian Angels guy from New York City? Maybe just a regional celebrity. Anyway, the rest of the story is, who is Bannon and what's going on, and then the fact that this woman on Wednesday, this reporter, I guess all reporters have seen this in their inbox, but he reports on Wednesday, Sliwa sent out 2 emails to reporters offering interviews with 2 men available to talk about Bannon. U.S. Navy retired SEAL Carl Higbee, and Breitbart Jerusalem Bureau Chief Aaron Klein. Interesting that they had to go all the way to Jerusalem for that one. Sliwa insisted on Wednesday that she isn't working for Bannon. So, I don't know. Somebody else hired her. So I'm sure there's some weird workaround or whatever, like the one we described yesterday, which was also an enormously popular story for people to share online. The story of how Bannon was getting paid on the side by Make America Number One super PAC. By the way, a little bit of pushback on that one. People saying that's not illegal coordination. And I have no doubt that a good lawyer could make a good argument that it isn't, and they might even get away with it. In fact, like the idea was pushed that, well, what about, why would it be illegal coordination for them to use the theme of Clinton Cash, the book/movie, Clinton Cash, as a major campaign theme for Donald Trump, when, after all, it's printed in a book. There's nothing illegal about Trump reading the book and saying, holy cow, I believe this and I think it would make a great campaign theme. Nothing. If it was that innocent, but, I mean, he's not a well-read guy. But it would be very difficult, probably, to establish as fact in court that, this was presented to him by Bannon at the direction of the Mercers, because, there's a million... he's got an interest in placing that product in the campaign, too. He might not have had to be paid by the Mercers to want to do that. He probably wouldn't have to be. But the payments would be awfully hard to explain. Although, again, a backfilled explanation could become up. Well, I was paying him for, something else, or it was a revenue sharing agreement. But then again, for those payments to be coming out of the super PAC is difficult to explain. People had questions about whether or not this was an open and shut case. It's not airtight, but the forensics haven't been done yet. That would be, part of the trial process. Anyway, I just wanted to make you aware of that. Just so the game about this publicist is look around, and if you do happen to see in the next couple of days, today, tomorrow, whatever, stories about Bannon quoting this Carl Higbie guy, Higbie, or Breitbart Jerusalem Bureau Chief Aaron Klein about what a great boss he was, or what a great Navy guy he was, you'll have a chuckle, and you'll say, now I know how a small part of how the journalism world actually operates. If you get something in your inbox that says, I'll put it on a silver platter for you, make it easy for you to write this story. That's the way the world works. A lot of stories get written that way, and not all of them are bogus. But, so now you'll know. Now you have a little insider tip. Maria Sliwa emailed that reporter, and that reporter said, I'm lazy enough to turn that into a story. I'm under pressure. I gotta produce a story. Everybody wants a Bannon story. Here's an easy one. And it's probably not invalid. There are people who say that about him. There are also people who say that he's an incredible a-hole. But you edit that out accordingly, right? You're going to edit that out. I'm turning into that lady. By the way, speaking of that lady, I did have a follow-up comment on that piece. Of course, you all remember all the crazy things she said, and it's always fun to play that again, but there's no reason to run that whole video again. I just put in Pocket the other day after we played that a piece from The Hill, because I wanted to take note of the headline that they put on it, and it's going to be difficult to scan down here and look at it, but I think I might be able to pull this from memory if I just can't come up with it. But The Hill, when they picked up that story and ran with it, they had to put a headline on it, and they're walking a fine line, but they blew it on this one. It was, here we go. Here's The Hill. Woman, and you remember what she said, right? And you remember all the crazy stuff that she came up with. They headlined this thing. It's not factually incorrect, but their headline on it is woman in Trump shirt, true, shouts obscenities, true, at NBC reporter, true, all true. She did wear that shirt. She did shout obscenities at the NBC reporter. But I was reacting to that one. I just wanted to make note of it on the radio show, as I told The Hill, and not that they were looking, because it's a bot that tweets these things. There's nobody there reading their responses. But hopefully somebody else picks up on it and says, I work at The Hill. We probably should have done this one differently. The story was not that she yelled obscenities. That was startling, to be sure, and I'm sure surprising to a lot of reporters, or maybe not surprising to reporters. They probably see it all the time, and they do edit it out. But I just found that an amazing headline. Once again, missing the point. The point here wasn't that she shouted obscenities. The point was that she was so convinced that she was right about things that are absolutely wrong that she felt entitled to resort to that level of invective and obscenities, because the reporter was obviously so goddamn stupid that he didn't know the truth, which was that Donald Trump is an awesome president, an awesome man who toured the world to bring food to starving children. What about his $1 million a month anonymous donations to feed the children? She was so sure she was right that she was screaming and pointing and cursing at this guy. The story is, woman in Trump shirt somehow magically ends up believing that Donald Trump is actually, one, a generous philanthropist, which he's not. Farenthold has proven it, I think, beyond a reasonable doubt. And two, that once again, as with almost everything, Donald Trump supporters have come to believe not just the opposite of truth about things, but that the roles have switched. Donald Trump has spent the last couple of years bilking his charity out of the money that people give to it in the hopes that he'll turn around and give that money to charity. And instead, he's been using it to buy stuff for himself or pay his own Trump organization as often as he can so that he can pocket the money. And he's never traveled the world for charity of any kind. That's actually Hillary Clinton you're describing. She and Bill Clinton and Chelsea Clinton traveled the world for their charitable endeavors. And you can certainly find places where you think that they have been misdirected, misguided, or misspent their money, or improperly spent their money. I don't know. I've heard the accusations. But Donald Trump didn't travel the world in any kind of an attempt to make it look like he was being charitable. That just didn't happen. When Donald Trump travels the world, it's to make private dollars for himself. And that's okay. It's just you're an idiot to come to the conclusion that Donald Trump ever lifted his butt out of a chair for anything charitable. Whereas, even if she did a terrible job with it, which she didn't, Hillary Clinton really literally did travel the world for charity. And that's the story. Not that there was obscenities. I think we all have accidentally or on purpose used obscenities. Woman uses obscenities. Is that really a good headline? I don't think so. But anyway, the Hill's not listening to me, and they don't need to. I just wanted to note that. By the way, okay, so let's see, scanning our comments section here, which is what we'll call my responses and replies and the KITM hashtag. Ricky May says she knows who the Guardian Angels are. They tried to come to Halifax, Nova Scotia a few years ago. The city ran them out. If you're not familiar with them, look them up. A vigilante neighborhood patrol organization, but with hats. Berets, in fact. I don't know if they still use it, but back in the day, the 80s, they had these like flashy red berets and like faux silken jackets. Like before there were members only jackets, I guess this is what they used. So they sort of looked like a gang, which I guess they were. It's an awfully dumb thing. Anyway, at least other people have heard about them, and it's not just a New York colloquialism. I think, is Curtis Leawood dead? I think he might have died a long time ago. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Okay, so let's see. Next up, here's a follow-up. We'll go back to Pocket. I've looked at the note that I wrote to myself. Why did I write this note to myself? That's what I needed to do, was tell myself why I wrote. Oh, yes. Satire that backfires. That almost rhymes. Satire that backfire. Work on it. Right after the election, I think I saw this one, and I think I kept it. Yes, here we are. First, I saw a tweet. Here we are, breaking news. I saw a tweet by George D. on Twitter. There you go. Breaking news, everybody. George D. George D. I don't know George D. But anyway, he tweeted this. I guess he took the picture, and then other people tweeted it around, and that's how it reached me. This picture, he says, was taken in San Francisco this morning. Yes, San Francisco. Hashtag post-election 2016. It is a picture of a otherwise normal-ish looking house somewhere in San Francisco with a flagpole attached to the side of it and flying a Nazi flag. And I guess the surprise of it was supposed to be, well, twofold. One, hey, you're flying a Nazi flag. And two, hey, you're flying a Nazi flag in San Francisco. I thought San Francisco didn't have Nazis. It's against the zoning laws in San Francisco. San Franciscans, I think, you know that that's true. Anyway, it's not. But there was some sense of irony to this. Even in San Francisco, we have people who take the message of the election, which, after all, was separated by about 107,000 votes, as we sometimes need to remind ourselves. We're a Nazi country now. Okay, that might be overreacting. But I saw that and I said to myself, self, That looks like a person who is flying their Nazi flag ironically. That's what I said to myself. Of course, I said to myself, I says, the kind of person who would think of flying a Nazi flag ironically doesn't really actually own a Nazi flag. Do they? I don't know. I don't think that's something that might be a little bit complicated. But I did wonder. I said, what if they're flying it ironically? Although that was really supposed to be a joke about San Francisco hipsters more than anything else. But true, that could be what they're doing. And lo and behold, not 5 minutes later, but in fact 6 minutes later. I don't really know how many minutes, but I did find this story. I made the joke. I made the observation. What if they're flying it ironically? And somebody came back to me with this piece from the San Francisco papers under the banner of the SF Gate online. And I always forget exactly which papers that is connected to. But anyway, here's the story. San Francisco homeowners' Nazi flag protest of Trump backfires. Yeah, there's a little bit of auto-playing video that I'll have to put a pause to. But here's the story. Flying a Nazi flag at his home in San Francisco's Dolores Heights on Wednesday was Frederick Rober's attempt to make a social comment on President-elect Donald Trump. But if your name is Friedrich Roeber, R-O-E-B-E, I don't know, how would you say that in German? It's not Roeber, is it? Anyway, who cares? Some German people, you protest. I'll pay you $1,500 to come protest me. Anyway, I do wonder, did he say, oh, you know what I've got that's great for this occasion, as satire, a Nazi flag? Or did he say, I gotta go to the Nazi store and get it? He was ready with that Nazi flag pretty quickly. I just want to point that out. Just like the protester I saw the other day that had some Ku Klux Klan protesters. I'll see if I can dig up this tweet. Standing out on the, who knows where, flying a Confederate battle flag, which again, the pedants out there will point out correctly that it's not actually the battle flag. It's actually whatever. Anyway, they've settled on something that is flag shaped and has the stars and bars, but isn't the Confederate flag, and it isn't quite the Confederate battle flag either, which was square. Whatever. That aside, they had one of those banners, and it was on a flagpole that he was holding, but you could see very clearly in the photo, high resolution photo, that the flag had until very recently been folded very tightly, and not like you're supposed to fold flags, but folded like in a package, from the factory, folded into a little square, and you could see all the creases and folds in this flag. And it looked very ugly and poorly done, your protest, sir. But it also made you look like a dilettante as a Klansman. How is it that you had to go out and purchase a brand new flag for this occasion? If you were a real Klansman, you would have a family heirloom Confederate flag at the ready. So I'm disappointed in you, sir. But this guy is a Nazi flag. So let's get back to reality, please. In San Francisco, the 48-year-old Mr. Rober quickly realized the display was misguided when neighbors spotted the ominous swastika and immediately confronted him in the street outside the house. Rober, who is retired at 48, congratulations, and lives in the storybook-esque home. It looks like a nice enough house. At the corner of, if you want to go beat him up, Sanchez and 21st Streets. Well, anyway, don't beat him up. He said he didn't like Trump's comments about Muslims and Mexican immigrants during the election. I am hoping that people get that this is a political statement and that I'm not a Nazi supporter, Rober said outside his home's wrought iron gates and manicured garden. I'm a little afraid that neighbors will get the wrong idea, but that's exactly what happened. Francine Miller, whose grandparents were Holocaust survivors, lives across the street from the home, and when she spotted the flag, she headed straight over for a stern chat with her neighbor. It was a comment on our new president-elect, Rober attempted to explain to the woman. I can see where you're coming from. See, we're so lovably tolerant. It's fantastic. But that's really the wrong impression, she shot back. It makes it look like you are supportive of Nazis. As your neighbor, I don't think it's funny. Rober, faced with the reality of the situation, responded, okay, I'll take it down. He then went inside and pulled the flag down and replaced it with a California Pride flag. Down the street, neighbor Linda Sontag, who also said she comes from a family of Holocaust survivors, saw the flag earlier in the morning before Rober got home. I'm in complete shock, she said. It's making me literally sick to my stomach. I can't know what their motives are, but it's disturbing no matter what. It's very disturbing. Well, it's been cleared up, and I hope we can believe the guy. He's not a real Nazi, but he did have that handy. That I found weird. Okay, so also speaking of Klansmen, something I saw yesterday being shared on the internet and found to be one of the more dead-on images of the election. I'll have to share it with you in the roundup because this is not a visual medium. But comedian John Fugelsang, famous dude, has shared this one on his Facebook page, but it came to my attention not through Facebook, but because Kenneth Norgard, who is he's probably hanging out with Bjorn there in Norway. I don't know if he's Norwegian or not. I'll click on it in a minute, but it's a fantastic parody of the old Norman Rockwell self-portrait painting, although in this one, our protagonist is seated at his easel and looking at himself in the mirror and painting. He is wearing a Ku Klux Klansman's hood, looking into the mirror, seeing himself in that hood, and the self-portrait he is rendering on the easel before him is that of Captain America. You get it? He sees himself as Captain America, despite the fact that he's really just a Klan thug. It took all the joke out of it. I know. Sorry about that. By the way, Kenneth Norgard is Danish, or at least living in Denmark. So he could be Norwegian and living in Denmark, but I don't have the eye for those languages close. I don't have a close enough understanding of it to tell you whether that's the case. I'm just guessing. I'm covering all my bases and wasting time doing it. Okay, back to Pocket. Let's see what other amazing things I set aside for you that I don't actually have time to get to, and we'll try and hit them all up. Okay. Let's see. Among the many other stories, I want to outline something for you that I thought of while I was talking to Joan. I thought of it on Tuesday night, and I thought I'd bring it up with Joan, and I just couldn't. But I brought it up on Twitter yesterday, and I just want to lay this scenario out. I don't want to give you any false hope that it's going to happen, or that it can absolutely work out the way we want, or that we're going to get the result we want out of it. But I got to thinking about my annoyance at having seen Merrick Garland filibustered for so long. Not that I was a gigantic Merrick Garland fan, but it's always fun to think about Garland seated on the court, mostly because my brother clerked for Garland, and I think it would be cool for him to make it to the Supreme Court in that sense only. I don't know if I'm not really in love with the guy's judicial record necessarily, but I don't hate it either. It's a not love, not hate relationship I have with his record. But for the period of time during which my brother was his clerk, his decisions were all awesome. How about that? Anyway, thinking about the fact that he had been blocked for what's coming up on a year, I guess at this point, February through November, not quite there, so 3/4 of a year, and the political nature of it and the BS nature of the newly minted rule, as they like to call it, that you can't have a Supreme Court nomination in the last year of a presidency, and then they began saying when they thought Hillary Clinton was going to win, Hillary brackets Clinton, in case you didn't know. When I thought that she was going to win, bracket, the presidency, in case you didn't know, they were going to block her for her nominations for 4 years, and that they would just have a permanently downsized court until they could get a Republican president. So now I think the opportunity for finding principled Republicans is probably pretty narrow. But for a while, it sounded like there were a couple of Republicans who said, we really shouldn't be doing this. And we certainly, should consider the fact that, are we really willing to say, to own up to the fact in public that we are holding this seat open for Donald Trump? And that was always said when it was assumed that Donald Trump had no shot whatsoever. But, if you're ostensibly a Republican Trump supporter and you're blocking the Garland nomination from being considered, then in effect you are holding the seat open for the crazy-ass Donald Trump to make his crazy-ass nomination. And everybody, chuckled about it because it was both true and also such a long shot. But now it's a reality, and we have to face that reality and the reality that anybody who didn't want to be saddled with that responsibility will have to speak up in the lame duck and possibly take up the Garland nomination. But we know that Mitch McConnell doesn't want anything to do with that. So I began to see if I could hatch a plan procedurally to maybe force his hand on it. You can't force him, but you can get him to see reason, right? I mean, it's possible. I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can come up with the thing, but at least that's a thing he does from time to time, is see when he's beaten. So how can we beat him? So as with most of my ideas about manipulating Senate rules, it started with something that the Republicans already did once and failed at. And I just pick up the ball, perfect the work, and get it done. Same thing with the nuclear option. Not my idea originally, and came to my attention originally through the writings of Republican scholars. I mean, it was written up in a scholarly journal. But these scholars were both, I think one was a professor, but one was an actual Republican operative inside the Senate. Anyway, the idea of the nuclear option, which they called the constitutional option, originally was laid out, or I guess it wasn't even originally laid out. Originally it was laid out by the people who actually did it back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, or attempted it anyway in the 50s and 60s and did it in the 70s. But the article that brought it to my attention was written up by Republicans, and the name they hung on it by Republicans. But they never pulled the trigger on it, and all I did was pick that up and say, this is really something that can be done. Let's think about doing it and think about doing the work that it will take to convince senators that it can be done. Because despite the fact that it had been done before, they all pretended to have forgotten it. And despite the fact that it had been written up prominently, they all pretended they never read it. And those who did read it pretended that it was somehow baseless. And it wasn't, and we needed to change that. And we did. And so they changed at least part of the filibuster rules using a similar procedure. Now, in the middle of all this, after having studied this situation so closely and learned so much about Senate rules in doing it, when did this happen? But this has been about, I don't even remember exactly, but it would have been when, in the mid-2000s, there was a very closely, there's always a rather closely divided Senate, but a very, very closely divided Senate. And maybe it was immediately, no, I don't think it was immediately following the Jim Jeffords switch. But the Republicans had, it was very closely divided, only like maybe a 2-seat majority or something very narrow in the Senate. And it was the beginning of a new Congress. And the Republican Senate, I'll have to look up the entire history of it. The Republican senators were unhappy with the division of committee assignments as between the majority and the minority. They felt that, and maybe it was immediately after the Jeffords thing, when the Senate was evenly divided, but they felt that they were entitled to either they wanted a 50-50 division of every committee, which would have kind of been suicide in terms of getting things done. But the Senate had the working majority for whatever reason, and it may have been that they held a 1-seat majority, and that was enough. But they wanted something closer to 50-50 division of the seats on all the committees, and they threatened that if they didn't get their way, and they had some claim to having a very closely divided committee, but you can't make it 50-50 because you won't get anything done. And if there is one side that actually has a majority, the mathematics are such that, you don't have 100 senators on a committee. You only have 10. And to have a functioning majority, if it's 8-7 on the committee, at least when necessary along party lines, you can get things done, mechanically speaking. If it's 8-8 and you're just deadlocked on everything, that's a very bad situation. And you can't put, 0.5. You can put it 8 senators from the Democratic side and 7.5 from the Republican side, just to more accurately reflect the actual division in the Senate, because nobody wants to be the 0.5 senators, right? You can't do that. You could do it if you did votes by halves somehow, but too complicated, right? 8-7 is the closest you can get, even if the Senate is divided 51-49. So, anyway, the Republicans at that point threatened to filibuster the organizing resolutions in the Senate. What is that? A little bit of the mechanics of that. When the Senate, remember, first of all, that the Senate, A, considers itself to be a continuing body. That is a questionable concept, but the reason they consider themselves to be a continuing body versus the House, which renews itself in its entirety every 2 years by electing the entirety of the body every 2 years. The Senate, of course, only elects 1/3 of its membership every 2 years, and they're staggered in the 3 classes, right? So this year there were 34 senators, or Senate seats up for election, up for grabs in the election. And that left 66 senators still serving and sworn to their seats from prior elections. So the Senate considers itself to always have, and it's a good emergency measure, to always have a sworn and seated quorum for work. You need a 50%, 50 senators makes a quorum for general business in the Senate. But there are always 65 to 67 of them still seated from prior election cycles. That's why they consider themselves a continuing body. And the upshot of being continuing body is their argument that they don't need to readopt their rules every 2 years because they're not resolving themselves entirely like the House is. It's an argument. It's got its problems. We don't really need to know that for the purposes of this story. But what ends up happening in the mid-2000s is the Republicans say, we want a more favorable division of the seats on the committees, and if we don't get it, we're going to filibuster the organizing resolution. The organizing resolution is just that, a resolution, in fact, 2 resolutions and sometimes more, brought up in the first couple days of a new Congress in the Senate, that the purpose of which is for the body to formally approve the assignment of newly elected senators, the new incoming class, even if they're being reelected. Doesn't matter whether they're brand new to the Senate or they're just returning to their old seats, but those people are beginning new terms. They are not currently members of the Senate until they're sworn in, once their credentials are presented from the secretaries of state of their respective states. They're sworn in, and the Senate formally, at the recommendation of the 2 parties' steering committees, they are formally assigned committee seats. And there's very often very little question about what those people will do. There's sometimes very long-serving senators coming back to the chairmanship of their committees. But formally speaking, they are entering a new term, and it needs to be done again. So they were going to filibuster the organizing resolutions, which would have the effect of freezing things in place. And the newly elected and reelected senators wouldn't get their committee assignments so long as Republicans filibustered the organizing resolution, and that would foul up committee work immensely. It's a bad thing, and was, another sort of in-your-face throwing out of the norms of political discourse in this country and the way we do things. So it was upsetting and worrying, and Democrats were sort of biting at their nails in the Senate about what are we going to do about this thing. This is going to screw up the whole session. I don't know. I guess this might have been, now that I think about it, I still can't place the time now. I'm confusing myself. The point is, it doesn't really matter when it happened. They were going to do this thing. And they were worried about it. And it occurred to me, I watched the argument over it because I'm an idiot and I read the Washington, D.C. trade papers, roll call and the Hill and stuff, and I pay attention to this nonsense. And I said, wow, I guess you can do that. I don't know that I recall it having been done in recent times. It might have been done in the past and I don't know about it. But what would happen if that happened? I guess senators who, even though they've been serving on the finance committee for the last 20 years, at the start of a new term, they have to get reassigned to it, and they're going to go back, and they're going to have their seniority and all that stuff. But unless the organizing resolution passes, under what authority are they seated on this committee? I don't know. That's troubling. Well, who are all these people? Well, there's an awful lot of them. And I guess at the time, I think it was in one of the election years, one of Harry Reid's re-election years, if that helps us nail down the year that it happened in. But it occurred to me because he was in that situation. He wasn't going to get his committee seat unless they did this. So they started to kind of sweat on it. And I said, let me take a look at this. Who got elected this year? Who's returning? And what committees did they serve on? I want to know what's the practical effect. Let's say all the people who are in this class don't get seated in their committees. What would committees look like? Presumably, the people still serving on them and still sworn to their seats get to remain. The resolutions assigning them to their committee seats from prior Congresses haven't lost their effect. So let's take the committee lists and let's scratch off everybody who's been reelected and scratch off every name, of course, that retired and didn't come back and was replaced by somebody else who's a member of this new class. What would the committees look like? What do these rump committees look like? And as I did this work, I realized, you know what? If the Republicans filibustered the organizing resolutions, there would be, in many cases, overwhelming Democratic majorities on some very important committees. Not all of the committees, but a lot of really key committees would be overwhelmingly Democratic, and there would be no Republicans assigned to the committees to do any objecting to reporting out whatever the hell you wanted. And those measures would then come to a floor that had a Democratic majority, and you would have these beautiful 100% through and through democratically crafted bills from committee with virtually no Republican input coming to the floor of the Senate and facing a Democratic majority. This is a great thing. Invite them, roll out the carpet, give them a fresh fruit plate, and pray that they filibuster the organizing resolutions. We'll steamroller them on legislation. And I guess it dawned on him pretty quickly after sharing that, that really would work. Okay. So, obviously the answer is you go back to the Republicans and say, go for it. We'll kill you. And I guess they did. And the Republicans said, didn't think this all the way through. And then suddenly the threat to filibuster the organizing resolution was gone. And they may have come to a more, a better understanding of how the division ought to work. Anyway, there may have been concessions made, but they definitely were able to use the leverage of, if you did this, it would backfire, to get them to say, all right, well, we're not going to do it. So I was thinking about that the other day. And I was thinking about, I started off by saying, well, what would happen if Democrats now threatened to filibuster the organizing resolution? It may be that it just leads to the Republicans saying, the hell with it, nuclear option, we're getting rid of the filibuster once and for all. That's not great right now, but it's not the end of the world either, and maybe not even the worst thing in the world if the filibuster was just gone forever. I wish it would happen under different circumstances, and it is very frightening to think what they might rubber stamp. But then again, I guess in the face of totalitarian can you say totalitarian authoritarianism? Is that just too stupid and redundant? But in the face of a Trump presidency who doesn't care for the norms of governance in any way whatsoever, I don't know if the formality of not having a filibuster available in the Senate makes any practical difference, though it might make a symbolic difference. It might normalize his totalitarianism. Well, there was no objection in the Senate that I could see. But I think we're taking care of that now by pretending we're going to work with him and knuckle under to him. That's not sending the right message either. Anyway, so I began thinking about what about filibustering the organizing resolutions in the Senate. And I realized pretty quickly, that doesn't make a great deal of difference. I'll take a look at what would happen. And some committees would end up with a Democratic majority. And this is the result of, you know what? It must have been 6 years ago because Harry Reid just retired. And it was during the same class period. So what year is it? So it must have been 2010. What the hell was happening in 2010? Closely divided Senate? You tell me if I remember this correctly. It's either 2010 or 2004. But I think that was that's too early for it to have happened because I wasn't doing nuclear option work until 2005. So 2010 must have been when it happened. And it didn't work out for them then, but it really wouldn't work out for us now, though there would be, in many cases, a Democratic majority on most of the committees because of the fact of the way the classes were structured. We thought, remember, in the lead up to this year's elections, we thought, there's a decent chance of taking over a majority in the Senate this year because of the number of Republicans seats that are having to be defended. It was very lopsided in favor of Republicans, or in favor of, that is, there were many more Republicans who were defending seats than Democrats, so there were more chances if there were going to be upsets or people who were defeated as incumbents. They would be the ones on the spot. By the same token, the next election cycle is terrible for Democrats. There are far more Democratic-held seats that will be up next time around and will have to be defended, right? So it occurred to me that the possibility was with so many more Republicans, even though they won their elections, needing to be sworn in and reassigned to committees, blocking the organizing resolution might have a lopsided effect on Republicans versus Democrats. Surely there would be some Democrats, some newly elected Democrats who we are very excited about having assigned to their committees would also be left out in the cold. But on balance, it would be much worse for Republicans. So let's try it. Except the problem is that there's still a Republican majority on the Senate floor. So you could report whatever the hell you want. Let's say you have this fantastically, overwhelmingly Democratic committee all of a sudden. You could report out whatever you wanted, but it still reaches a floor controlled by Republicans, and they can just say, I don't care what the committee says. To hell with that. We're either not moving that bill or amending it to death or tabling it or recommitting it to committee. Who cares? In addition to which, the Judiciary Committee was one of the few that actually ended up still remaining majority Republican, even if you didn't seat anybody from the newly elected class. So it wasn't any more likely to report out a, say, Merrick Garland nomination to the Supreme Court. And even if it did, it still reaches a floor controlled by Republicans. So that wasn't going to be an answer. That's a long time to spend on something that isn't the answer. But it made me think about other things that you could fool around with on day one. And day one of a new Congress in the Senate has kind of an interesting mystical quality to it. If you recall the old discussions of the original Constitution/nuclear option and the way it was described, and I favored doing things on the first day of a new Congress, really just for the clarity of it, but also because there is this opportunity to make the claim, which has some historical basis, that as we start out in a new Congress, despite the fact that we like to think of this as a continuing body and 2/3 of this body are already seated from previous election cycles, there really is or ought to be an opportunity at the beginning of a new Congress for the Senate to formally consider whether it wants to acquiesce to the continuance of the old rules or wants to take a moment to revise its rules, and that it ought to be able to revise its rules under general parliamentary law and general parliamentary procedure, where a majority rules, not the automatic continuance of the old set of rules that says rules can't be changed if a objection is raised and a filibuster is entered into against a rules change, it would then require 2/3 vote to break that filibuster. That was what was at the heart of the problem with changing the filibuster rules and the necessity of the constitutional/nuclear option in the first place. So, there's something very strange going on the first day. True, and it has this very strange quality in that there's this moment there where they're constituting the body. In the House, they have this problem where they're reconstituting the whole thing, right? When you go to swear in members in the House, right? You say, I need an official to swear people in. In a special election, a by-election, right? Something that happens in an off year or something for whatever reason. When you get to the House of Representatives, and the formality of making you a member of the House now that you've been elected in a special election is you take the oath. Who administers the oath, right? Well, the Speaker of the House can take care of that. That's an official of the House. And sometimes the Speaker will do it, sometimes, publicly, sometimes privately, but they like to do it on the floor of the House when a new member arrives in a by-election. And, you do the whole thing and raise your right hand and put your hand on the Bible, or in some cases the Quran, or in other cases I don't know what. But anyway, and you take the oath. Or affirmation. Boy, things we have to cover. But what about when a brand new Congress comes in, right? You don't have a Speaker of the House. You know who it's going to be later when it's all formalized. But right now, you'd have 435 members arriving, all of whom are effectively brand new. So, who does the swearing in? Well, that problem is solved partly by rule and partly by tradition. The clerk of the House is a continuing servant of the House, and his or her job is considered to carry over from the previous term, and the clerk of the House is responsible for receiving all of the paperwork, all of the certifications from the secretaries of state of everyone's election, making sure that they're in order, and handing those things over and beginning things, and calling the House into order. The Speaker of the House, not yet having been elected Speaker of the House, can't call the House to order and begin the roll call and begin the process of swearing people in. The clerk does it. The oath is administered not by the clerk, but rather by, traditionally, the Dean of the House, who, even though the Dean of the House would be the longest serving member of the House. And for years that was John Dingell. It no longer is, of course. But the Dean of the House administers the oath en masse to all of the new members, and then presides over the clerk's calling of the roll on the election of the Speaker, and then the Speaker, having been elected, gets the gavel and then goes on with the day's business and the reconstituting of the new House. In the Senate, you've got the Senate Senate President pro tem, and that's kind of sort of given a pass on the continuance too, even if the serving President pro tem has been is a member of the new class. Although I don't know, I haven't watched it that closely. That really shouldn't get a pass, and you should just simply say the longest serving currently seated member of the Senate should take care of this stuff. But as between the Secretary of the Senate and the Senate President pro tem, they take care of the business of getting people, along with the Vice President, of course, the Senate President can take care of getting people sworn in. Sometimes the Senate President / Vice President of the United States doesn't bother showing up for the first day, but very often they do, and that solves the problem there in the Senate very easily too. And they can administer the oath of office, and they usually do, in groups of 3 or 4 with the new classes of senators, and everybody gets a nice moment on C-SPAN to come up and take the oath. So, that's one of the first things, of course, that takes place on the first day of a new Senate. But, what if you decided to make some mischief for once in your life? On January 3rd, which is the date designated by the Constitution now for the new members of Congress to show up, unless it's a Sunday. I think you can't do it on a Sunday because, separation of church and state and all. But it's usually on January 3rd, just as the inauguration of the president is January 20th. So what that means, of course, is that on January 3rd, Joe Biden is still president of the Senate. He's still the vice president of the United States. He will call the Senate, or could, if he decides to show up to take the gavel, call the Senate to order and swear in the new members. At that moment, in the chamber, aside from honored guests, family, etc., and staff, will be, in effect, the President of the Senate, Joe Biden, and 66 currently seated and sworn senators of the United States, and 34 newly elected senators, or rather senators-elect, awaiting their swearing in. After they take the oath, of course, they would be senators just like the other 66. But at the moment, the Senate would be constituted of Joe Biden and 66 currently serving senators, staring at 34 other people about to become senators, but not senators yet, formally speaking. Normally this stuff goes pretty smoothly, and there's no reason to interrupt it, and nobody really wants to interrupt it. And it's bad news if you do, because it sets you off on the wrong foot with a lot of people. But more needs to be explained about this. Among the 66 senators in there, plus Joe Biden, 33 of the senators who will be seated and sworn senators at the time, at the very first moment of January 3rd in the Senate, 33 of them are Democrats. Two of them are independents, Angus King and Bernie Sanders, and they generally caucus with the Democrats. So if you lump them in there, 35. So 66 senators, 35 of them are, or I guess 65 senators in this case, unless I have done my math wrong. But anyway, 35 who caucus with Democrats and 30 who caucus with Republicans. In other words, at the very first moment of the business of the day on January 3rd, Joe Biden is in the chair, has the gavel, and there is a functional Democratic majority at the beginning of the day on January 3rd. Nobody ever does anything with this because it's rotten. People don't like it. People will be very upset, especially if all goes as planned and everybody gets sworn in at the end of the day, or forget the end of the day, in 5 minutes from now, there's going to be a Republican majority, and that majority is going to last for 2 years minimum. And they can make your life very, very miserable if you make the first moments of their lives very, very miserable. But the fact remains that effectively you got 35 Democrats and 30 Republicans. A majority of the House, a majority of the chamber, rather, is Democratic, and the gavel is in Democratic hands. If they don't stop for anything, in 5 minutes it reverses, and the gavel will be in Republican hands. But at that moment, Mitch McConnell is not the majority leader yet. He hasn't been elected as majority leader for this Congress. In addition to which, there's no Republican majority in the chamber at that moment. So, here's where you monkey around, right? It would take an enormous amount of guts to do something like this. Or extraordinary circumstances, like, say, the accidental election through the intervention of some foreign nation state to elect a neo-fascist dictator to office with a white supremacist chief strategist, et cetera, and everybody questioning his legitimacy and fitness for the job, et cetera, right? So that's kind of extraordinary. So what if you talked to Joe Biden ahead of time and you said, listen, ordinarily you open a session like this and Mitch McConnell, who everybody knows is going to end up as majority leader in a few minutes, rises on the floor to be recognized to say, Mr. President, I want to welcome our newly elected members of the Senate Thanks very much. Well, why don't you, let's proceed and swear them in. And sometimes, I don't know, I think last time around I watched some C-SPAN footage of the way the actual opening of a new Senate goes. And it's not always the case that the vice president, or the president of the Senate in this case, recognizes anybody at all for anything. He just goes right to the swearing in. So the question is, if you talked to Joe Biden ahead of time and you said, here's what I want to do. Here's what I'm thinking. You're going to have the gavel in your hand. You can do whatever you want at the opening. Normally you just go right to swearings in because that's what you do and you don't want to upset anybody. Or if you recognize anybody, by tradition, the majority leader, if he is on the floor, is recognized preferentially. Even if you're jumping up and down and saying, Mr. President, Mr. President, Mr. President, which is what you would call the vice president when he's in the Senate, he's just going to ignore you if the majority leader is present and standing and seeking recognition. It just doesn't work any other way. But that's just by tradition. And technically speaking, the guy with the gavel gets to decide. So if you say ahead of time, I want you, when you get in there, the first thing we do before we start swearing anybody in is you need to call on me. I'm going to be standing and seeking recognition. I'm not the majority leader. I'm in the minority, or I will be in a few minutes. But at the moment, actually, if you think about it, I am the majority leader. I certainly could be the majority leader. I'm a member of the party that has a sitting majority at that moment. I want to be recognized. You might even be able to argue that you have the preferential recognition coming to you. Now, Chuck Schumer, who is the presumed Democratic Senate leader for the next Congress, will at this moment be among the 34 members awaiting swearing in. So he won't actually have a formal role in this. It would be, I guess, Dick Durbin, the next ranking Democrat who's already seated. Unless I somehow ignored the fact that he was up for election, but it couldn't possibly be true. Since the Duckworth election was going on at the time, rarely have states got 2 Senate seats up at the same time. Anyway, so Durbin would have to do it, but I guess it could be anybody. But if you arrange ahead of time, I want you to call on me, Teach. I'm going to be raising my hand. Call on me, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to lead the 33 to 35 seated Democrats constituting the majority at that moment of the Senate. We're more than 50, so let's roll. We have a quorum for doing business. And besides which, we don't need the 50 since we haven't constituted ourselves under the old rules just yet. But I essentially am going to filibuster or, at least try and conduct some business before we get to the swearing in. That's very unusual, and it's going to be very, very infuriating to Republicans. But here's the mechanics of what I want to do. Call on me first, and I'm going to say, hey, everybody, guess what? These guys over here aren't senators yet, and they're not until we do the swearing in. And guess what we're not going to do until I lead this 66-member chamber or 65-member chamber in a little bit of housekeeping business. What is that business? I move that we do now immediately resolve ourselves into executive session for the consideration of the nomination to the Supreme Court of, and if you really want to be, crazy about it, Hillary Rodham Clinton. Now, of course, that would require some assistance on the side from President Barack Obama. But supposing he writes a little note and sends it with Joe, and it says, I hereby nominate Hillary Rodham Clinton to serve on the Supreme Court of the United States. Signed, Barack Obama, still president for another 17 days. Sorry, losers. Sorry, haters. LOL YOLO. And he's got that. Look what I have in my pocket, says the vice president. It is, in fact, a nomination of Hillary Rodham Clinton to the Supreme Court of the United States. I do recognize the leader of the current majority of the Senate of the United States. The motion is to go to executive session for the consideration of the nomination. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. And wow, it's 35 to 30. We're in executive session. It requires only a bare majority to go to executive session, and if you make the motion, the joint motion, to go to executive committee for the purpose of considering the nomination of Hillary Rodham Clinton or anybody else to the Supreme Court of the United States, it is a non-debatable motion and therefore not subject to filibuster, even if you wanted to argue that the old rules continue. But if you somehow convince somebody that the old rules did continue, you would just be in the old constitutional option mode right there, and you just say, well, guess what? Tell you what, for instance, you get to executive session, that can't be filibustered, and you say, I move that we move immediately to a vote on the confirmation of the nomination. Now, people will object, you didn't have any hearings on Hillary Clinton. Not that we would need any. We had extensive hearings on Hillary Clinton, just not for justice of the Supreme Court. But you don't need them. It's a nice formality. It's the way they feel like doing business typically. Nothing says you require it. You can go straight to a vote. But can't a vote on a Supreme Court justice still be filibustered? Yes, under the old rules, if you think you're operating under the old rules, which is a lot of questions about. But let's say you are. Let's say you assume for the sake of argument that you are. Guess what? The chamber, as currently constituted, is 35-30 or thereabouts, assuming that you can get Bernie Sanders and Angus King to go along with you. Even so, it would be 33-32 if they decided to side with the Republicans for whatever reason. And that's all you need. Watch this. I'm going to nuclear option the Supreme Court nomination thing. Now, that's dangerous, right? Yes, and it is. Because what if Donald Trump comes in and he says, I'm going to make the Supreme Court 35 people, and I'm going to pack it with Mr. T and Ivan Drago from Rocky IV and Gene Simmons from Kiss, whoever. I don't know who he would put on the Supreme Court. Yeah, that's a danger. And yeah, even what I'm about to tell you doesn't protect you against that danger, but nothing protects you against totalitarian dictators. But one of the little tricks that they pulled in 1975 that I thought was so neat and a little bit dirty was that when they did nearly end up invoking the nuclear option, and I've explained in the past the gray area about whether or not they did or didn't, but one of the things that they did afterwards was for the senators who were nervous about the precedent that would set, they took a token little vote afterwards that said, we hereby declare that precedent erased. And that's all it takes in the magic of the Senate. So literally you could, if you needed to, nuclear option the filibuster on that crazy Hillary Rodham Clinton nomination right there and then, confirm her to the Supreme Court, then go back and erase that precedent and claim that the nuclear or the filibuster still applies for Supreme Court justices. It would be bald-faced hypocrisy. No doubt about it. But you could do it. And then hand it all back and then say, okay, now that we're done with that, please proceed with the swearing in. We're not dictators after all. Please proceed with the swearings in, and then voila. Here is your Republican majority again. But Hillary Rodham Clinton is on the Supreme Court of the United States. But we'll impeach her. Well, you could try to impeach her. Absolutely. That will, of course, require a 2/3 vote of the Senate, and I don't think you're going to get that, but go for it. Well, yeah. There's not a lot. Now, is that too crazy for them to attempt? As an ambush, yes. I think they could do it. And that the point really is, can it mechanically be done? What would get done next is senators would say, we really, despite it all, fighting tooth and nail about everything, we don't ambush the other side. That was something Harry Reid was always very clear about, and that's why his original objections to the nuclear option, even though he eventually did it, were we don't do this stuff as an ambush. You might say, why the hell not? And it's a good question. But they're repeat players in the game, and they got to treat each other with some respect, even though you can never see it. So what might likely happen instead is, what you would do is you would go you arrange it with Biden, you arrange it with Obama, and then you go to the Republicans and you say, look, the mechanics of it are this. We can force this. It will infuriate you. It will strike the American public as wrong, but we can do it, and we can install Hillary Rodham Clinton or any crazy-ass liberal you might want to think of instead, if you want to just add pressure to it, the whole situation. We can do it. But we'd rather not do it all quite that boldly. What about if, instead of having to face this down, and I know you'll say, oh, you'll kill us at the ballot box in 2018 with this. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. We think no. But rather than suffer this and have to explain this to your people in the face of this big Trump victory that we pantsed you on this, instead maybe you want to consider that sometime in January, or sometime in December, I should say, we just say, you know what, to hell with it. We never really wanted to give this job of assigning a new Supreme Court justice to Donald Trump in the first place. Merrick Garland was fine. We did this for the election. We got the results we wanted out of the election, both for the presidency and the Senate. Let's just confirm Merrick Garland after all. You could do that, and then you say, but it'll look on its face like relatively normal procedure. It will have been forced by this threat of this extraordinary procedure, but it'll look on the surface like normal procedure. Now, what about if Republicans say, I can't sell this, I can't go back to my people and save face, having confirmed, certainly not confirming Hillary, but I can't go back and say after campaigning against confirming Garland that I caved and confirmed Garland. I can't do it. I'd rather you hang me and pants me and give me Hillary Clinton. And I can just say, total corruption, outrageous, unbelievable, rigged. I'd rather live with that than give you Garland. Maybe. Maybe we come to believe it. If you come to believe it, if you come to believe that for some reason it's not going to work out or the Hillary Clinton thing will actually hurt you instead, you could, if you really wanted to, just as an alternative, I'll throw it out there and say, how about, what if you said, if we in December instead put, let's say, the least offensive Republican you've got here in the Senate in the Supreme Court instead? Because why a Republican senator? It could be anybody, but a Republican in general. But senators are just easier to confirm in the Senate because they all know one another. But you could pick anybody. But if you found the least offensive Republican you could think of, and I know that's an impossible task, but if you took Lindsey Graham, or even for that matter, Mike Lee, if you believe he would be a strict constitutionalist and would somehow constrain a crazy, out-of-control Donald Trump, I don't know whether you can believe that anymore, but if you took a Republican and said, we'll give you a Republican, it's not going to be Merrick Garland, you won't have to live with that, it won't be Hillary Clinton, and you won't have to live with that either, but let's install somebody who's not completely insane, but who's one of yours in the Supreme Court, and close that opportunity off for now to Donald Trump. It may be that there's a retirement, it may be there's a death at some point on the Supreme Court, and he gets his chance anyway. Roll the dice and take it. But this one really belonged to somebody else. We acknowledge you screwed us out of Merrick Garland. We acknowledge you screwed us out of Hillary Rodham Clinton. You can win. You can have a Republican. It'll be a conservative majority, but it won't be a nutso majority. Would you take that? And if they would agree to do that, and you just say, we're going to avoid the whole fight where we totally pants you, that's the benefit to you. Would they take it? Should we take it? Would it look good for us? Would it look bad for us? Would it look like we caved? Probably. On the surface, it probably would. Would you ever find out the reality behind what leveraged the deal? Probably not. Something to think about? Well, probably so. We'll close it out that way and hand things over to the guys on the after show and see if we can't cram in a little bit about what they'll be talking about, like so. Trump sycophant and GOP State Senator Doug Erickson has proffered a bill to prosecute anti-Trump protesters as terrorists for blocking the street. Ooh, terrorism. The NYPD forces a Rutgers professor to undergo a psych evaluation after a student felt threatened reading his anti-Trump tweets. And Corey Lewandowski's back in the news. I'll tell you about that in a minute.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
What's Corey up to? He's been boasting at the Oxford Debating Society that Comey's letter handed the election to Trump. On the last half, they'll be reporting that confusion reigns over when and where in New York Trump's first meeting with a foreign leader, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, would take place today. I think I misunderstood that entirely. They'll explain it next.